Good morning. Welcome. It's great to see a full session at 9 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for coming today. I'm Jean Massey with the Mississippi Economic Council, and I'm the Executive Director for the Ascent to 55% program. Before I tell you a little bit more about that, I'm going to let each of our panelists introduce himself or herself so you'll know who's up here before we begin.
Good morning, my name is Bethany Miller, and I am the Human Resource Manager for Western Container in Hattiesburg. And I was asked to join this morning based on my passion for encouraging our future employees to have skills that pay.
Thank you. Good morning, Bradley Lum. I am the Deputy Commissioner of Workforce Development for the Department of Corrections. I'm also the CEO of MDOC Works, which is formerly what many of you know as Mississippi Prison Industries. And my role is essentially putting people on a pipeline to work, and so that's why I'm here to talk about how we start to do that and do it better.
Morning, my name is Nathan Oakley. I'm the Deputy Director for K-12 Innovation with Accelerate Mississippi. It's the State Office of Workforce Development, and we're, as an office, trying to be the kind of the tip of the spear for workforce development strategy and deployment in the state. And my particular role there is in the K-12 space, as we consider that, from my perspective, all education is workforce development. We want our students to have this galvanized pathway, industry-driven, that gets them out of the education space into the world of work that we know exists here in the state.
Thank you. Very quickly, just kind of as a little background so you'll know what our program is about and what Ascent to 55 is all about. We're really talking about securing Mississippi's future through alignment of Mississippi's education and workforce system. When we talk about attainment, we're talking about, in order for our economy here in Mississippi to be productive, we need to have at least 60% of our citizens with some type of education beyond high school. And when we talk about post-secondary and we talk about college, often we hear somebody say, well, what are you going to do? I'm going to college. I wasn't meant to go to college, so I'm going to find a job. Well, I want to be a lineman. Where did you go to get the training to be a lineman? Well, I went to Holmes Community College. You went to college. You may not have gone for 4 years, but you've been to college. So we want to change the perspective. We want people with AAs, we want people with AAS degrees, and we want our people with bachelor's degrees. The more we have, the better we can move in Mississippi. But we also want to honor those that have those short-term, long-term certifications that get people a good paying job and can support their wages. So that's what we're doing in Mississippi. Thankfully at MEC we have a grant from the Woodward Hines Association that's allowing us to work on this process. So our first piece, the Education Achievement Council, the EAC, we love those acronyms. So the EAC set a goal that by 2030 we would have 55% of our adult population with some form of post-secondary education. And by 2035, 60%. Now, that's down the line, but we've really got to look, because if you look at Southern Region Education Board's data, it says by 2025, and by the time we blink and open our eyes again, it's going to be there, that we need 60% of our people with certifications. So for the past, since August, Jason Dean, Jason Wade, Jason's helping us with this. Jason and we've been on tours across the state. We did 8 from each of the ecosystems from Accelerate Mississippi, working very closely together to find out what is really needed in the state and to listen to each part. Now, I can tell you every region in the state has a little bit different need and a different way to get there, and we've got to honor that. But there are still the same barriers in every place. I'm not sending y'all out, but I'm just going to say, across the way, we're talking about the early childhood. Without early childhood, we're not getting to attainment. So let's keep those things in place. We're all working with this together. A few numbers that you need to know as we begin. This is from the Lumina Foundation. This is who started the Ascent to 55% programs, or the attainment across the country. Every state's working on an attainment goal. Nobody has reached their goal yet. Nobody. So that according to Lumina, 12.2% of our individuals in Mississippi have a short-term certificate. 36.3% of our people have an AA, an AAS, or a bachelor's degree. So our state attainment right now, based on Lumina data, is 48.5%. We know we've got a lot of work, and we're much higher than that, because what we have found over the past several months is we don't have a good data collection system that lets us put in those short-term certificates into these numbers. Those 12.2 from Lumina is pretty much a guesstimation based on census data and other things. What we found out is all of our community colleges are collecting this information on the workforce side, but it's not going into our state longitudinal data system. So we're working on getting good numbers for that as we move forward. What our big issues are is our participation rate for employable adults in Mississippi is 54.6%. That means 54.6% of the adults in Mississippi are working to support the others. You think about that. That burden is falling on that group of people. We've got to change those numbers. Those numbers are 10% lower than the national average. Also in Mississippi, when you look at the jobs that are available, only 16% of our jobs require somebody with just a high school education. I think back to my parents, and when I was coming, there were lots of jobs that you could get coming out of high school that you could support your family. That's not true anymore. Only 16%. But 23% of our people, that's all they have, is a high school diploma. So there's a huge gap there. Our bachelor's degrees, jobs in Mississippi that need a bachelor's degree or above, are 27%. We have 27% of our people with a bachelor's degree. Problem, they don't align always with the workforce needs. So we've got to do a better pathway job. But our skills, that middle level, 57% of the jobs in Mississippi require some type of certification above a high school diploma, but not necessarily an AAA, an AA, or a bachelor's degree, but something in that area. And we only have 50% of our population that fit into that. So you see where our gaps are. So we've got to look at those things and start thinking about where we have to go. We at MEC really want to focus on policies that can drive our producers. Now, who are our producers? Our 30 colleges. We have 15 public and private universities and 15 community colleges. How do we help them drive policy that brings people into work? And that may sound easy for you, but I want you to think about a community college. Every community college has two sides. They have their credit-bearing side, which has your academic and your credit-bearing career and technical classes. But they also have a workforce side. And you're going to hear from our panels more about how we've got to align this work soon. Then we also want to look at how we can have policy for our consumers. Who are our consumers? First, our high school students. We've got to do a much better job of aligning students that come out of high school with what happens next. And that can even be around our accountability system. It can be around a lot of different things, because we have a large number of students. We are number one in the country for students leaving high school, entering post-secondary. Number one. But after year one, it drops to like 24, 35, depending on which year you're looking at. They don't go back for the second year. Is it because they don't know what they want to do? Is it they're not ready academically? There are a lot of different reasons, but we've got to address those issues. We also want to look at this group of 18 to 24. They're the ones that are getting ready to enter that pipeline truly by the age of 25. So how do we make sure those individuals are there? Then we need to bring our disenfranchised workers in, our adult workers. We've got to bring them back into the workplace, help them get the certifications, all of the things they need, so we have to look at barriers. And then those are the types of people we need to look at. Bradley's here to talk about our prison industry. That is a huge group that we've got to look at. We've also got to look at military. How do we bring them back into the workplace and get them going? So, and then our last part is we really look at how do we align this around all of the different attainment, affordability, accountability. How do we make it accessible for everyone? How do we look at the barriers? So when you think about this as a whole, like Nathan said, we've got to think about it across the state and how do we work together to improve the attainment. It's not just on one, it's on all of us. And so today what we really want to do is let our panelists kind of start talking about what they're doing and how they're moving forward. So I'm going to let Nathan begin and let Nathan talk to us a little bit about your work with K-12 and now with Accelerate. How important is it that we align these pieces and what needs to, just kind of off the top of your head, what needs to be done?
So I spent a long time at the Department of Education before I came to the workforce office, and so I've a high-level perspective on the education system here in the state. The gains that we've made are absolutely remarkable, and they've come at great labor from teachers and families and students across the state. But only recently have we as a state started to really consider, beyond the academic connection from secondary to post-secondary, we've only recently started to consider the connections and the implications on the workforce side. Like I mentioned earlier, I think all education is workforce development. All of my education colleagues wouldn't necessarily agree with me, but I would argue if I go to Ole Miss or I go to Jackson State or Southern, like the students that finish that four-year degree program or the students that finish at Holmes or Hines or wherever, their next step is not to go back home to the couch. Their next step is to get a job, right? So college to career, not college to couch, ought to be our mindset. And so for that reason, I would argue the education that happens in the K-12 space ought to be preparing them for that next step in the phase. And so Gene mentioned a bunch of numbers with disconnects and misalignments. What we are trying to do as an office, we have taken an approach as a state through Accelerate. There are similarly situated workforce offices in other states that have different charges. But when Ryan Miller and the SWIB exec committee kind of stood this up and launched, they envisioned an office that wasn't just looking at post-secondary, but was looking holistically at the continuum from early childhood through K-12 into post-secondary with on-ramps and off-ramps that lead people to jobs. And if that alignment is going to improve, it's going to happen in the K-12 space to better position students to get into the right post-secondary programs to then get into the job that exists in the state. There's a big disconnect in the communication space. Students largely don't understand the industry opportunities that many of you have to offer in your communities. Just last fall, I was talking to a student from Tishomingo County, college student. I shared this with Gene earlier, I think. College student who grew up there, was in college, and found out that there's a Northrop Grumman facility right there in town. He had no idea. He's like, you mean this was a job opportunity for me? Why did nobody tell me about this? So we as an office, Accelerate has deployed through, initially through federal funds, through ARPA, and more recently, pending signature, waiting any day now, through general funds, we have deployed career coaches into high schools across the state, and we're looking to expand those in the coming school year to sit down alongside high school students to say, Jason, what are you interested in? What do you like to do with your time? Are you good at math? Do you like science? Do you like working with your hands? Do you like being around people or by yourself? Would you rather be inside or outside? Are you interested in science or healthcare? Helping Jason figure that out. And Jason, you probably still don't know what you want to do when you grow up, but helping people just like Jason figure that out and positioning them within business and industry to get a work-based learning experience or an apprenticeship, to bring business and industry partners into the school, to talk to the students about the opportunities that exist there, to help them consider financial aid opportunities, student college applications, resumes, interview skills, because those students, we want them to pursue that next step, not just to meet the attainment goal, but to better themselves for success. But we want to do that deliberately so that they've got a more clear trajectory into the opportunities that exist in their community, not a finish a degree, a four-year degree, and then figure out later what I'm going to do with it. So we're trying to better galvanize that pathway through the K-12 space into post-secondary with the right credentials, not just for credentials' sake.
Thank you. I'm going to kind of go through and let each talk for a few minutes on each thing, but we're going to save time at the end for any questions and answers or anything like that, or any comments you want to make. So if you have anything that you want to ask someone, be ready. If you hear something that comes forward, be ready for that. So, but we are going to go through. Bethany's never writing another article. Okay. Bethany wrote an article in the, for the Magnolia Tribune back in April, and when we saw it, we thought, we need her to come talk, because her article was entitled, Young People Need Skills That Pay. In that article, she asked a question, why are so many employees unable to fill skilled positions? And she talked about the misconceptions being made. So Bethany, if you will, kind of talk a little bit about your article and how you were talking about the misconceptions.
Absolutely. So I think generationally we have a misconception that manufacturing is a very dirty, unsafe, not productive wage-wise or benefit-wise opportunity for young people. If you think back to our grandparents or great-grandparents' generations, the American dream very much was working hard as a backbone of America to produce our own products and bring those things forward. Today, the American dream has really shifted. It's more of post-secondary education, bachelor's degrees, master's degrees, and I hear a lot in HR of that's not what I went to school for. And so I think the challenge is that we have to show young people that manufacturing and nursing, all of these skilled trades that we have in Mississippi pay wonderfully compared to a lot of things that people are going to school to get bachelor's degrees for, if we're being completely honest. And that there is opportunity here to have benefits and 401ks and things that don't really matter when you're 18, but when you're 30, that kind of hits you in the face and you're like, man, I should have looked into that a little bit better. And so I don't know if people realize how automated and challenging manufacturing has become, but if we continue to not have skills that pay, or children or our young adults continue to not enter the manufacturing workforce, how many of you remember the great toilet paper shortage of 2020? Those are made in highly automated facilities, and if we continue to not encourage our students to find and define their own success and the way that they define that, then we're going to continue to have shortages like that. We're not going to have those raw materials. Our economy is not going to be what it needs to be in the state of Mississippi. Manufacturing is a very large portion of the economy in the state of Mississippi, and as an employer of in a highly automated facility, we struggle to find enough people that have the skills to do. It's either they have skills to do general labor and they don't want to learn anything else, or they're overqualified and they don't want to learn any kind of trade skills. So we've got to find that balance and challenge young people to define that for themselves.
Thank you. Bradley, you have already been doing a tremendous amount of work at the corrections. We are not trying to reinvent and accelerate, but we want to bring forward the activities that are there and see how we can help accelerate and move them forward also. Would you talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on right now and some of the barriers you're facing?
Well, we would be here a while if we were talking about the barriers that we're facing. But I'll try to keep it short. First question for you guys, who's in favor of public safety? Raise your hand. Hopefully that's everybody. Who's in favor of second chances? I think that when I ask that question, when I speak to groups, everybody should have raised their hand either on one side or the other or on both. And frankly, my job encompasses both. President Bush said it best when he said, America is the land of opportunity. And when the gates of the prison open, it should lead to second chances. And that's just a reality. And in Mississippi, much like across the country, we have struggled with how to reckon those two things for a long period of time. But I think, despite what you may hear, despite the fact that certainly we have some challenges as it relates to parole and incarceration and crime and all of these issues that are hot topics in the news, the reality is in the state of Mississippi, we're moving down the path very quickly to recognizing that this population is vital to our workforce. But not only that, the gravity of impact for this population is so extreme in the state of Mississippi, because when we don't put somebody on a path to work, when we don't put them and see them as a part of the workforce and give them opportunity and hope, well, what do you think happens? In most cases, our law enforcement officers are policing that individual again. right? Because they're circling right back through the cycles of incarceration. So it's no it's no secret that the state of Mississippi, by percentage, is the most incarcerated state in the United States. But also, when you talk about those who everybody in here knows somebody that has a felony background. We all know somebody. I've got a family member that has a felony background. The reality is, in the state of Mississippi, there are a lot of felony backgrounds. So when we talk about increasing the percentages of the people going to work, my job is as much being a cheerleader and blazing a trail for employers to recognize that this is the right thing to do for the state of Mississippi. It's good policy to hire those who have felony backgrounds, not because you're scared of them, but because they can be a vital part of your workforce. And we're doing the work that it takes to ensure that's happening. So to your question, Gene, what we have done since I've been in this role, and I started as the CEO of what was then Prison Industries. In short, the goal was to change the perception of what Prison Industries does. I saw it when I started as, look, you guys see this as the end, just making products in our prison system. But the reality is, it has to be a means to an end. The means is preparing somebody for a job that leads to a career once they get out. And so we started there. We had a lot of success. I think we met the needs of 750 to 1,000 individuals over about a year period of time. And you got to understand, at that time, we were working with about 500 inmates in our facilities inside our prisons. So the legislature said, you know what, this is working. Let's expand that. And I worked myself into a job to be the Deputy Commissioner of Workforce for the entire state. And so under the direction of the Commissioner, I am now charged with kind of making sure that all 18 to 19,000 inmates that we have in our prisons are on a path to opportunity. Now, that's not to say that everybody's going to be that. And that's not to say that everybody's even able to do that. We do have some bad people in our prisons. That's a reality. And I think we have to be, we have to speak to the nuance of our prison system, because for so long we've categorized it one way or the other. But we have a whole lot of folks that if we give them hope and we give them an opportunity, it is going to lead to a better state. It is going to lead to safer communities. And so that's what we do. And so we have started the path in partnership with Accelerate Mississippi, who we got some money through some of the ARPA grant last year. We've stood up career services offices in each of our prisons, our big institutions. We should have a grand opening very soon on 2 vocational villages, one at Delta, one at CMCF. And those vocational villages will be able to take inmates through a variety of classes, all the way from all of your construction trades to cosmetology and barbering to fiber optic training, which is a big one right now, to coding, computer-based skills. So we're kind of going through an array of job opportunities, and certainly we want to grow that in those vocational villages. And then we got past last legislative session. Chairman Barnett really championed this bill. We created a work release pilot program. So we have 25 individuals who work in the central Mississippi area. They go out to work every day. They wear clothes just like you and I do when they go to work. And they get paid anywhere from $12 to $15 an hour, and certainly have the ability to graduate from that. But they're putting money in savings. They have some money that they can spend. And that is a program that we expect to see grow. So everything that we're doing is centered around how do we take this population group and put them on a path to employment, because it's good for them and it's good for all of us when we can put them on a path to employment. So everything that we're doing is kind of geared towards that. I look at it as if we really want to see the fundamental fabric of society change in the state of Mississippi, I think this is the population that we have to address holistically. It's nuanced. There's not a one-size-fits-all, but everything that we're doing is geared towards allowing our inmate population to see the light at the end of the tunnel, and that light is much brighter than the light that they came from. And so that's what we do.
Thanks. And like I said, we did the tours, and when we were in the Delta, your ecosystem, I think it was 1 in 3. Those 2 ecosystems, we had a set of questions we asked each group. And one of their biggest barriers that came out in those 2 from anywhere were the individuals coming back into their community from the prison system that were not employable. So that was huge up in those 2 areas. So we really do want to make sure that we honor this part. How many of you in here know or have met career coaches in your region? not many hands. Nathan, would you take a minute? You mentioned career coaches a few minutes ago. Kind of talk a little bit about the career coaches and how they can help change. And you kind of hit on this, that trajectory.
So we deployed 108 career coaches to just over half of the high schools in the state this current school year, so last fall. If you don't have a coach in your community, it's because your school district did not express interest in getting a coach. We expect to be able to, again, pending signature legislation, we expect to be able to deploy an additional 50 coaches. We'll be able to redeploy the coaches that are out now, deploy potentially an additional 50 in this upcoming school year, and we're going to focus on pockets of the state where there's not currently a coach. So if there's a district that doesn't have a coach, we're going to start there. If there's a district that's sharing a coach across multiple schools, that'll be kind of our second order. But the coaches are working through grants to our planning and development districts, economic development associations. Those entities are deploying coaches in different regions of the state through grant dollars that our office administers. But the coaches are hired to go and work directly within a high school with individual students, with groups of students, to complete career aptitude and interest inventories, to talk to students about job possibilities that exist, to coordinate with business and industry in the community, to help students get set up to go and visit, maybe get a summer internship or apprenticeship there, work-based learning experience there. The Department of Ed actually is doing some similar policy work in this space to allow students they complete a career tech program in 10th, 11th grade. At the end of that program, they started with healthcare and ag for this current school year, but they're going to be expanding that going forward. A student can actually get placed within a local business or industry, do an extended period of work there, and get credit towards high school graduation, Carnegie credit for graduation, for that application of their learning from their previous CTE courses. That does not mean I went through a healthcare program in high school and I got a job at the Dollar General and I worked for a semester. That means I went through a construction program and I'm spending time with a local construction company for an extended period of time over the course of maybe my last semester of that course sequence. But the coaches are also working. I've talked a lot about the K-12 space. We're doing similar work in post-secondary with retooling the wet fund projects that we've got as a state to support direct training for demand from business and industry. The coaches are working with students to help them identify post-secondary programs where they may be interested and getting them connected to faculty, staff, instructors at the local community college that may help them, may be positioned to help them in that next phase of their career. We've heard just anecdotally from the northwest part of the state where DeSoto County has a contingency of coaches that are working in that district, largest district in the state. Michael Heinz, the president at Northwest, talked to us probably 6 weeks, 2 months ago and said, we're not really sure what's going on, but we have seen doubled interest for the fall in our CNC program, which is important for that part of the state in particular. But he said, we don't know what's caused that. He said the only thing that's changed is that we've got coaches in high schools talking to students about careers that exist in our part of the state. That's the only thing they can draw attention to, that it's a potential change. But those coaches are impacting individual students and their potential for success down the road.
Thank you. And I think what Nathan just said is important. I want you to remember, a lot of your coaches are educators, not all, but they need to be in your business, seeing what your businesses do so they can help the kids. That's one of the issues, and one of the things we're working on too, is seeing how we can get some programs together. But the coaches are making a difference, so we want to keep pushing that forward. Bethany, just for a minute, you've talked about that lack of people misconception. How can the education system better align to make sure that we get rid of that misconception and that you get more people into your workforce?
So I'm super excited to work with Mississippi Accelerate and the career coaches. They have definitely made a tremendous impact just in their first couple months. We also have some other programs that are going on throughout the state. There is the Skills Foundation, which is putting on a new marketing program called Skills That Pay. So one of the things that educators can do is integrate these trade skills into early childhood education. you don't necessarily make the decision 6 months before you graduate what you're going to do after that, right? But if you're going on a tour of a Nissan or a Coca-Cola facility when you're in second, third grade, you're probably going to remember that because it's more of a fundamental time in your life than when you're trying to be cool on Snapchat in your teenage years. And so that's when we need to start integrating this and bringing this in, that not everybody has to be successful on standardized tests. Some people, their mind works very differently than that. Not everybody has to know how to work a PowerPoint, because if that's all the skills that we all have, we're not going to have houses to live in. And so encouraging young people to work with their hands, explore new opportunities, integrate things like how it's made and dirty jobs into those learning days that are not as structured. Maybe there's standardized testing and things like that. And get creative, reach out to your local industries. I know in our facility we're always open to having young people come tour, having interns, things like that, just to kind of try to encourage the growth and development and have a true learning opportunity for our community. So just encourage young people to check out what actually goes into these skills that pay, and explore other options than just traditional classroom learning.
Okay, I'm gonna kind of follow up because we were talking before. It's not just the K-12 system, it's also the post-secondary system. You were telling me a little bit about an internship program that you were working on with Pearl River. Can you kind of mention a little bit about that?
Sure, so I'm super fortunate that the Pearl River Workforce Development Group is a wonderful group of people to work with if you have not. And they have a partnership with the South Mississippi Economic Planning and Development Commission, where they provide us interns that are part of their CTE program. They are paid through a grant, and it's an excellent opportunity for them to get to see, one, what it's like to interview with an employer. They have to provide us with a resume. They have a person that they report to within PRCC's network as well. And it's a good way for them to get hands-on experience. So they're not going to be able to do exactly what they're going to school for. A lot of ours are going to school for electronics or instrumentation. I can't let people be in an electrical cabinet without being certified. And so there's a lot of opportunity there, though, to see what a day-to-day role is like in industry. And so integrating those internship programs and things like that have really made a huge impact. We have 2 interns from a year ago that we hired. I'm also super fortunate in the Hattiesburg area. Our economic development group at the ADP is wonderful and tremendous in connecting everyone and keeping workforce development going. So,
Right, thank you. We're going to have one more question, then we're going to open it up for you to ask questions. Bradley, you talked a lot about what you were doing inside. Part of this effort is going to have to be from our assistants, like Ascent to 55 and the individuals in this audience today. What are some of the things that we can help you with that need to be addressed in order to really make this work?
Yeah, that's a great question.
Our population is a little bit different, right?
We've got folks that are really skilled in our prisons. So the question is not so necessarily always a blanket that we need to upskill them or we need to get them skills. We've got a lot of folks that have the skills. We've got a lot of barriers to their opportunity to employment that we've got to work through. So I think one thing that you're seeing just from the general public is recognizing that, look, if there's a tremendous amount of barriers for the population of those that have felony backgrounds, then it doesn't make a whole lot of sense from the standpoint of actually getting them back to work. We had an example of a guy about 7 months ago, maybe about a year ago, that had a ride to work. He was working in South Mississippi in kind of a welding job, and he had a ride to work, and the guy's car broke down, and so he borrowed his mom's car, but he didn't have a driver's license. And he came back from work. Got off his shift at like 9 o'clock, and he was driving back to his house. Guy had been working for 3 or 4 months on parole, and he went through a roadblock, and he didn't have his driver's license. was 4 months out of prison. So the next thing you know, because everything's not aligned, we end up in a technical violation situation, and the guy's serving 3 more years of prison to finish out his sentence. But he was going to work every day, right? Well, what sense does that make? It just doesn't make sense. And so I think what's happening from a general public standpoint is everybody's starting to recognize, man, we got a lot of barriers in place that just don't make sense. They're artificial because we thought that this was in the name of public safety. We thought that this was going to make our community safer, but it doesn't, because it puts people in a position where they're coming right back to us for no reason other than the fact that they didn't meet some regulatory guideline. So that's important. But probably more important than even that, from my standpoint, with the relationship with Ascent to 55 and the general public, is we've got to let people know that we are open for business, that we have inmates ready to get out of prison and go to work, and that employers should look to us as a source of that labor. That's important. And I think, I think we talked about this maybe on a call, is I'm in favor of a statewide public service campaign to say, look, inmates are ready to go to work. I had a graduation last week at our Flowood CWC, and it's our first time that we've had women go through medical classes. So we had a phlebotomy class that they graduated with a certification in. They had a CNA class and a medical billing class. And to the graduation, it was a white coat ceremony, right? So they had a white coat on and green stripes. And I said, look at what you're wearing. This is the picture that we've got to paint. That you're trying to take a step out of prison while still having your green stripes on. That's important, because that gives the image to them and to the public that, man, these aren't folks that are just walking around in stripes. These are folks that are on their way out, and they're going to be back in our communities. And we can either put the support around them to ensure that they're successful, or we can just stay mad at them. Well, staying mad at them doesn't work. It just doesn't work. I'm so tired of seeing the same folks because the barriers are too great. We want to take every circumstantial component out of the equation. And I tell our guys this all the time. They got to make a decision to go back to prison. So if anybody wants to make the decision that they want to be back in prison, then I can't help you there. But we got to take every other barrier out of the equation. So having the marketing and the public relations in place to ensure that folks recognize that this is a population that we need to serve, we need to serve much better, and it can help our state, it can help our labor participation rates, it can get us to 55%. And as important, it produces better public safety. As a caveat to that, one of the things that we are going to be launching, hopefully by the third quarter of this year, is what I'm kind of tentatively calling, and I'll say it here publicly. I don't think I've said it publicly yet, but we're tentatively calling it a pre-entry program. We want folks, like, we got to work with our career coaches and accelerate. And when we start talking about high school kids that we keep seeing show up in our correctional system, we got to address that before they ever get to us. So we're going to call it pre-entry, and we're going to start addressing that at the high school level to ensure that, hey, corrections is not the place you want to be. And frankly, we don't want you here. Don't come to us. We're not interested in bringing you into us. So that's the kind of holistic look that we've got to put in place that addresses all of the various factors and all of the various age groups to ensure that we're putting people on a path to employment.
Thank you. And I hope one consequence of him getting those ladies their white coat, the kids they have will enter a program. And we never have to think about it. So going there. All right, we're going to open the floor up now and let you ask any questions you might have. We want to hear from you too. So don't be shy. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I'm Ellen Collins from Mississippi Mississippi Alliance of Nonprofits and Philanthropy. And Bradley, I think this goes to you. I'm happy to hear that you are promoting what we can do around aligning policies to support those who are reentering. But are you thinking about those other barriers that they see when they get back to communities? Because, there are other things that trigger people who have been through experiences like this that can cause them to, react and, get back into the system, such as the wraparound support that nonprofits can bring, or for community-based organizations or the faith-based community to work along with some of the pilot programs
Good question. Thank you for asking that, because I would have left it out if you had not asked that. So thank you. You know, one thing I think that was new to me when I got into this role was recognizing the reality that just about, or really 100% of the folks that go through incarceration, that are incarcerated at some point in their life, have an underlying reality of trauma, right? So trauma is just, we all have trauma in some way. Nobody's life is perfect, but it's a different type of trauma that those who have been incarcerated deal with. I mean, just whether you live in a cell or you live in a dorm style, within our facilities, there's a lot of trauma that goes on, emotionally, mentally, all of those things. And so we have to address it that way. But that means that we have to have wraparound support and support services long after they are released, because the reality is that although we can put somebody in a job, what happens when they lose that job? Because a lot of times when they lose the first job and they end up back in a hotel because they don't have anything, and next thing you know, they're back, they're arrested for crack cocaine charge. So what we have started about 1.5 years ago, I came up with the bright idea that we should create an alliance. And we call it the Hope Alliance, because hope's never used, right? Helping offenders prepare for excellence, or helping offenders prepare for entry into society. And so we created this and have started down the path of aligning a lot of our state agencies and our nonprofits kind of into that as an external component of what we're doing inside the prison. So as part of our ARPA funds, we just hired, I think, 8 HOPE coordinators around the state. So we've got individuals who are on the outside who are both helping find employment opportunities and providing some of the, kind of air traffic control for our individuals to ensure that as they're getting out, they have all the services that they need. So developing relationships with, Medicaid offices in those certain parts of the state, Department of Health, all of the various things that they would need. And then also helping to educate some of the employers on what some of the changes in the law that can help them. So as the new law that was passed last year, if you are an employer, you don't have to, your employee who is if he's on parole, he doesn't have to leave your work to go check into the parole office anymore. You can, as the employer, check in for him. That is by law now. That was passed last year, which I think is a fantastic law. We are slowly but surely seeing our employers implement that. In fact, Chairman Polk was one of the real big push that, because he had guys at his facility in, I think, Simpson County or Covington County that they would have to leave every day. They were working the line, and they would have to leave to go report. And so that's problematic as it relates to that. So all of that to say, we are creating, I think you can go to hopealliancems.com, hopealliancems.com, and you can get more information on that. But our goal here is that ultimately all the nonprofits that provide services, all of the church groups that want to provide services, that they're all aligned, recognizing that it is a continuum of care for an individual. It is not a bucket here and a bucket there and hope that it gets picked up. One of the most frustrating things to me when I started in this was the reality, or recognizing that somebody gets released from prison and then they have to show up by statute 7 days after they get released at a parole office. Well, goodness, what happens within those 7 days? That doesn't make any sense. So we started bridging the gap and bringing our parole officers into our facilities so that they knew who they were going to report to, so that they had some of those people and they were more familiar with those individuals before they ever got released. And they saw what the needs were while we had them in our facilities before they ever got out into the general public. Because a lot of times, a guy goes and 7 days later, look, I've got a family friend that the girl was incarcerated for 5 years with us before I got into this job. She was found in a park in South Jackson on an overdose 3 days after getting out of prison. That's a reality if you go look at the statistics. And so we've got to bridge gaps. It is a continuum of care. It is not buckets. It is not those in institutions and those in parole and me in workforce and those in our community. It has to be a continuum of care if we're going to get this right. And so great question, and we're working through that. But you can go to hopealliancems.com to get more information on that.
Anyone else? Come on
I would
now.
follow up on that. We are using some of the ARPA funds beyond what Bradley's doing with MDOC Works for other wraparound services in regions of the state through some nonprofits that are doing work to support individuals with transportation, with child care needs, to get the training they need to get into a job, to offer support for disconnected youth, to offer folks coming out of military service, Bradley's space in the folks exiting justice system. So lots of work going on in that space.
And I think you see how important it is we all work together. It's not just Bradley's job to do this, it's all of our jobs to do that. I know there's a big initiative coming out of post-secondary around being able to provide services to help people get an education. So it's not one organization, it's gonna take all of us to move forward to do this. Questions, someone else? Look, I'm gonna, Jim.
Jim McHale, the Moving Hands Education Foundation. I've spent a lot of time looking at the attainment data, and when you could break it down by counties, and sadly enough, we have some counties that are literally single digit or low teens as far as attainment levels. Then you break it down by race, and you see white females are higher than African American females, and white males are significantly higher than black males. Are there specific efforts or strategies to deal with the racial equity issue, geographic issues? You know, you think about the coaches, you do the potential of hiring coaches that look like the students.
So the coaching approach this first year, we had 1 year of ARPA dollars, and so we're optimistic that with general funds now that will be perceived as potentially a longer term project. Frankly, we're asking folks to step away in many cases from jobs they had for a short term soft money. Maybe it's there, maybe it's not after a year, but we're trying to find the best that we can to do the work with the students. If the coaches look like the students, that's great. But if they don't, and we've got the best person that we can find in the community to do the work, and they're willing to go in and they've got a heart for students and a story to tell and a passion for it, that's where we're going. We're not trying to meet any quotas one way or the other, male, female, race, demographically, but putting the best people into those positions that we can. The effort that we're making, we have been deliberate in trying to, with the deployment of coaches, first make sure that there was interest from the school. We did not want to deploy coaches into a school where there was no interest from the principal or the superintendent in having a coach work alongside students. We're deploying the coaches into those schools to work directly with students and to try to identify those students who need that support. There's going to be students within a class who's like, they've got strong ACT scores, they're strong academically, they say, I want to go to Mississippi State and then the University of Mississippi Medical School. And I've got the grades to do it, like my dad's a doctor, my mom's a doctor, that's what I want to do. Well, that kid probably doesn't need coaching support. The student who is struggling, who's not really sure what he wants to do or she wants to do after school, is the student that we're trying to support. And whether that's a student from a school in the Delta, a student from a school in the southeast part of the state, but we are trying to address those students that have that need for coaching. And we often see those students are coming from broken homes. They're coming from high poverty environments. Yes.
Good question, Jim. And that's a sensitive topic for me. And I'll tell you why. My first job out of college was coaching baseball and teaching Mississippi Studies at Brandon High School. And so when you teach Mississippi Studies, if you do it right, you go through a lot of the reality of the state of Mississippi, right? That's Mississippi Studies. Makes sense. So part of the motivation for me being in the job that I'm in was that I recognize that you can either sit on the sidelines and talk about the challenges that we face from our past, or we can get involved and start to fix those things. And when you talk about inequality as it relates to labor participation rates or skill levels and all of these various things, I don't hide from this, and I don't shy away from talking about it. The reality of our prison system is that black men have been incarcerated at levels astronomically higher than every other population group, every other demographic. And if you go back and look at policy, the reality is that it's not been fair and it's not been equitable. It just hadn't. So the reality of where we are today in 2023 there's a direct correlation to the generations before. All right? So if I'm interested in seeing society be better and be fixed and be moving towards a more positive place in the state of Mississippi, then the top priority I have is starting to fix the past problems by way of ensuring that black men particularly, certainly we have white women and white men and and black women as well, but black men are put on a path where they see a future that they never saw before because of the cycles of incarceration that have existed in our state. And let me say it this way, and let me also say it this way, the reality is that Commissioner Kane believes the exact same thing I do. He did it in Angola, he did it at Angola, and he's doing it in the state of Mississippi. An 78-year-old white guy who otherwise, named Burl Kane, right? Who otherwise you would think is, but the guy believes in it, he wants to see it, and we're doing everything we can to make sure it happens. And I tell my staff all the time, if we do our job right, great-grandkids that have never been born will have a completely different future than the one they would get right now. So if it's our job to wake up every day, go to work, do it right, care about the people that we serve, and put people on a path where their future is completely different than what their past was. So that's what gets us up every day.
And I thank you for that question, because I do want to also emphasize, I want you to look at the population shifts across Mississippi over the last 10 to 20 years and what's projected for 2030. Our population is not rising. Jason's done an extensive piece on this. Our population is decreasing. Our population in our school system that's going to be seniors is going to look very different from what it does to now. If we do not pay attention to these gaps in areas, and we've got it by counties, we've looked at it by community college regions, because, hey, we in Mississippi don't mind getting our car and driving 50 miles to get to work. That's just the way we are and what we're there. So you've got to look at what's happening in regions. If we don't pay attention to these numbers, and we cannot have a one-fix-all for everybody. How do we increase where others are? You are sitting in Hinds County, Rankin County, and you think, oh, we're above the state's employment, we're above the state's attainment level. I'm in Rankin County. Rankin County is not above the state attainment level. So when we start looking at it truly county by county, and then we start looking at what the population in that county looks like, we have got to pay close attention in order to make sure that everyone has a chance so we can break that poverty cycle. Those coaches that Nathan talked about, they're there to help. I was a high school principal for 13 years, okay? Loved that job. Y'all think I'm crazy, but I did. 1,600 kids, loved it. I'd go back, if I had to go back in education, that's where I want to go back to, but I love those kids. Those high flyers that Nathan talked about, that doctor, they're going to be at that counselor's office that's serving 600 kids, beating down her or his door to get there. Our special needs kids have somebody fighting for them. It's that 80% in the middle that do not get the attention that's going to make a difference in our state. And that's where the career coaches can really come into place. So think about that as you start thinking. Any questions? We've got 6 minutes here. Yes, sir.
Okay. I own a company here in Jackson, and a lot of our travels are out of town, of local, and I'm familiar with the late Sheriff of Hinds County, Malcolm McMillan, introduced me to the Restitution Center, which I used, and I thought it was wonderful. It really worked well, except when you train some people like we were doing local jobs that didn't require an overnight stay, they couldn't go. So you essentially didn't have a sufficient number of people on your crew. With what you're proposing, or what you're working on, is there any leeway in that? And I know Restitution Center was people that really wanted to make restitution for what they've done.
Yeah.
Pay back the victim and have some money set aside. That really worked well, at least for us, but then they couldn't go overnight.
Yeah. It's a good question. So I would say that from a policy standpoint, when you do things successfully and people recognize it, it leads to, it's just like with my kids. If my kids go clean their room, I'm probably going to give them a little more leeway as it relates to certain other, issues that we deal with at the house. And I think this is similar in that we've had very stringent policy and law as it relates to this population group because we felt like it was the right thing for public safety. But as we are unpacking and doing this work release program right and putting people in a position where they're working for somebody knowing that they're going to get hired as they get released in that job, it's allowing our policymakers to give us more leeway as it relates to some of those things. So I think those are conversations that we've had, and I believe that a lot of that stuff is starting to be fixed. I need to look at that particularly, and we'll circle back and talk a little bit about that. We don't have anybody currently that's having to go overnight for overnight stays, but certainly I foresee that being something that if it's in the course and scope of the work that they're doing, and it's going to put them in a position to have a job, then they need to be able to do it, and I feel like our policymakers are interested in that as well. Good question.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Hi, Ricky from Milwaukee. So in many instances, whether it's K-12 or incarceration, there is a social economics element there involved, right? Because you don't know what you don't know type of thing. So what are you doing as far as providing exposure pieces to give them that knowledge of what's out there and what they may have a passion for? It's one thing to have a heart, oh, I want to be a nurse or I want to be a doctor, but then when you actually go into that field, it's not really what you want.
Great question, and I will say this, and I'll let Nathan and others answer this as well, but from our standpoint, what we are starting to do, and you said Slovakia, so I'll plug virtual reality. We are starting to implement virtual reality in our prisons to do exactly that. In fact, we did a demonstration at our office several months ago, and one of our ladies that works in our office at one of the CWCs had never changed a tire before. So she put the headset on and she went through the process working at a garage, changed a tire. By the end of it, she was proficient in changing a tire. Now, obviously, she needs to go get hands-on work, but if anybody's ever done the virtual reality, the headsets, and you've used the hands and all those things, you get the feel very quickly that you're actually doing that work and you're learning very quickly. And so what we're trying to do is start to use some of that to expose our inmate population to jobs that they never even know that they or would never have wanted other than being able to visually see that and participate in it. And then taking that a step further and looking at how do we address conflict resolution issues where if I walk up to you on the street corner and you say something that would trigger me otherwise, how do we prepare folks for that encounter to ensure that it doesn't lead to a street fight, right? Because I think that's something that we've not really addressed, like we should have. So those are things that we're looking at the moment.
As he passes the mic to Nathan to answer that, those of us that are as old as I am in this room, we may not look at the VR as much, but when I look at my 5-year-old grandson with the VR set on and doing all he's doing, we've got to move forward with different ways we can do things. I can't take a classroom student out every day to go visit Ingalls Shipyard on the coast. But if I have it through VR and they can really see it, I can take them that way. So we've got to look at how we can get people out. The jobs in the workforce that Nathan talked about, work-based learning, we've got to find a way to do that in a different manner than maybe getting them into the job some. Nathan.
I think there's absolutely some foundational exposure that can take place through technology for students that need that. There's a pocket of schools in the northeast part of the state that's doing some VR work with career exposure from middle school and high school and even into the community college setting. So there are aspects to that. And then I think the other piece that is happening is through, it doesn't happen everywhere or every day, but if you've got groups of students that are interested in the Hattiesburg area, for instance, in seeing what's going on with the manufacturing at Western. Bethany's obviously open to students coming in, getting that exposure. I was talking to Jason Dean earlier this week, like the experience of seeing some things, and even for changing a tire virtually, is very different. I can conceptually process how to do those things, and that's a great foundation for exposure. Like, yes, I'm interested in doing this. However, I'm going to have a hard time cross-threading an oil filter on a car virtually. I'm going to have the hands-on application to be able to really apply it for the long term. So it's a step in the phase, absolutely.
So our time is up. I want to thank everyone for being here, but I also want you to thank our panelists for coming today and their time. So when Ascent to 55% and MEC comes to your neighborhood with some town meetings, please come join us and help us work through this process together. Thank you.